I need to get this out because the past week has been absolutely wild, and I'm still processing everything that happened. 3 months ago, I thought I was marrying the woman of my dreams. Today, I dodged the biggest bullet of my life. So here's the background. Ruby and I got engaged last December after dating for 2 years. She's always been into luxury travel, constantly showing me Instagram posts of overwater bungalows in the Maldives, five-star resorts in Dubai, that whole lifestyle. I work in IT consulting and make decent money, but I'm not rolling in cash. Still, I wanted to give her something special for our honeymoon. About 6 months ago, Ruby showed me this article about treehouses in Bali. She was literally crying looking at the photos, talking about how it was her absolute dream destination. The place looked incredible. Suspended in the rainforest canopy, completely secluded, outdoor showers overlooking the jungle. She bookmarked the article and must have brought it up a dozen times afterward. She kept saying how amazing it would be to disconnect from everything and just be together in nature. I spent weeks researching that exact treehouse resort. Turns out it's actually pretty exclusive. They only have 4 treehouses and you have to book months in advance. The whole place is designed to be eco-friendly and off-grid after 10 p.m. to preserve the natural environment. I thought it was perfect because Ruby had seemed so passionate about the experience. I saved up for 3 months to afford it. We're talking serious money here. Not just the accommodation, but flights, the whole package. I wanted to surprise her with the booking confirmation at her bachelorette party because all her friends would be there and I knew she'd be excited to share the news. Here's where everything went sideways. I showed up to the restaurant where they were having dinner with the printed booking confirmation in a nice envelope. Ruby's maid of honor, Josephine, was live streaming parts of the night on Instagram, and I thought it would be a sweet moment to capture. Ruby opened the envelope and her expression just changed completely. She looked at the booking details and started reading them out loud to everyone. But instead of excitement, she was mocking every single detail. She held up the papers and started laughing about the composting toilets, the outdoor showers, the fact that electricity gets turned off at 10 p.m. She called it camping and said I was treating her like some kind of nature documentary host. The worst part was when she looked directly at the live stream and said I was trying to make her honeymoon into some kind of survival challenge. She actually said, I must think she's the type of person who wants to rough it in the jungle like some kind of primitive setup. Her friends were all laughing and making comments about how they would never accept something like that from their partners. Then Josephine grabbed the papers and started reading the details dramatically, emphasizing every aspect that wasn't a typical luxury resort. Ruby's cousin, Lori, chimed in about how her boyfriend had booked them a cruise with a private balcony suite. The whole table was treating my honeymoon plans like they were completely ridiculous. But Ruby wasn't done. She picked up her drink and poured it all over the booking confirmation papers, saying she was putting the idea out of its misery. Then she said I should have known better than to think she wanted to live like she was on some reality show survival episode. The live stream was still going during all of this. I could see people commenting and laughing along. Ruby kept playing it up for the camera, talking about how she needed to educate me on what actual romantic honeymoons look like. I left the restaurant that night knowing something fundamental had shifted. This wasn't just about different vacation preferences. This was about respect. I had listened to her talk about this exact place for months, and she humiliated me publicly for giving her exactly what she said she wanted. I went home and started thinking about our relationship differently. Ruby had always made little comments about my career not being prestigious enough, about my apartment not being in the right neighborhood, about my car being too practical. I had chalked it up to her just having high standards. But now, I was seeing a pattern. The next morning, I called the resort and asked about their cancellation policy. Turns out they're actually pretty understanding about genuine emergencies, but this was going to cost me the deposit either way. I explained the situation to the booking coordinator, and she was surprisingly sympathetic. She mentioned they get calls like this more often than you'd think. While I was dealing with the cancellation, Ruby was texting me like nothing had happened. She sent me links to resorts in Santorini and asked when we were going to book something proper for the honeymoon. She actually used the word proper, like the Bali treehouse was somehow beneath us. I realized I needed to have a serious conversation with her, but I also needed to figure out what I was really dealing with. So I started paying attention to how she talked about other people in our lives. Turns out she had similar dismissive attitudes toward my friends, my family, even my coworkers when she met them at company events. The breaking point came when she suggested I ask my parents to contribute more money toward the wedding because the venue she wanted was above our budget. She said it was embarrassing that we couldn't afford the kind of wedding her friends were having. She actually suggested I tell my parents that their contribution wasn't adequate for a proper celebration. That's when I knew I had to make a choice. I could either spend the rest of my life being treated like I wasn't good enough, or I could recognize that this wasn't the kind of partnership I wanted. The thing is, I'm not angry about the money or even the public humiliation. I'm actually grateful it happened before the wedding instead of after. Ruby showed me exactly who she is and how she views our relationship, and I needed to see that. Now I'm dealing with all the wedding logistics and having conversations with vendors about cancellations. Ruby is still acting like we just need to pick a different honeymoon destination and everything will be fine. She doesn't seem to understand that the issue isn't about vacation preferences. I know this is going to sound crazy, but I'm actually relieved. The woman I thought I was marrying wouldn't have reacted the way Ruby did that night. The real Ruby apparently thinks I'm not good enough to plan romantic gestures, and she's comfortable humiliating me publicly to make that point. Update 1. Okay, so I promised an update, and holy hell, you guys were right about everything. The comments on my original post really opened my eyes to patterns I'd been ignoring. Shout out to the person who said, "When someone shows you who they are, believe them." That hit harder than I expected. So after I posted the first time, I needed to have a real conversation with Ruby about what happened at the bachelorette party. I wasn't going to just let this slide or pretend everything was normal. I called her Wednesday night and told her we needed to talk in person. No distractions, just us. She came over Thursday evening acting like she was doing me some huge favor by fitting me into her schedule. She was already defensive before she even sat down, asking why I was being so dramatic about a simple misunderstanding. That word, misunderstanding, made me realize how differently we saw what happened. I started by asking her to explain what she thought happened at the restaurant. Ruby immediately went into this explanation about how I had surprised her, and she was just being honest about her preferences. She said she never actually wanted to go to Bali in a treehouse, that I had misinterpreted her interest in the article. According to her, she was just admiring the photography and the concept, not saying she wanted to actually stay there. But here's the thing. I have screenshots. Not because I was planning some elaborate gotcha moment, but because she had sent me the article link multiple times over WhatsApp. She had literally messaged me saying this was her dream honeymoon destination and that she wished we could do something that romantic and adventurous. I showed her our own text conversation from March where she said, and I quote from the message, that staying in a treehouse surrounded by nature would be the most amazing way to start our marriage. Ruby looked at the messages and her whole demeanor changed. She started saying that I was taking her casual comments too seriously, that she says lots of things about places she thinks look cool, but that doesn't mean she actually wants to go there. She told me I should have known the difference between her actually wanting something and just appreciating it aesthetically. This is where the conversation got really revealing. I asked her why she chose to humiliate me publicly instead of just talking to me privately if she wasn't happy with the surprise. Ruby's response was that she was caught off guard and reacted naturally. She said I had put her in an awkward position by surprising her in front of everyone. So her reaction was my fault for not thinking it through. Then she said something that really stuck with me. She told me that her friends expect a certain standard when it comes to relationships and weddings, and that my honeymoon choice made both of us look bad. She said Josephine's husband had booked them a luxury resort in Turks and Caicos, and Lori's boyfriend was planning a European tour with 5-star hotels. According to Ruby, my Bali treehouse made it look like I either couldn't afford a proper honeymoon or didn't care enough to plan something impressive. I asked her directly if she was embarrassed by me and my financial situation. Ruby got really defensive and said she wasn't shallow, but that presentation matters and people notice these things. She said her family and friends would judge both of us if we went somewhere that looked like we were roughing it instead of celebrating properly. That's when I brought up her comments about asking my parents for more wedding money. Ruby tried to frame it as being practical about what we needed versus what we could afford. She said most couples get help from both families and there's nothing wrong with asking for adequate support for such an important event. I pressed her on what she meant by adequate. Ruby started listing all the things she considered non-negotiable for our wedding and stuff dance. The venue she wanted, the photographer, the flowers, the catering upgrades. When I added up everything she was describing, we were talking about almost double our current budget. She said these weren't luxuries. They were standard expectations for a wedding that people would actually want to attend and remember positively. The conversation went on for almost 3 hours. Ruby kept trying to convince me that her expectations were normal and that I was being unreasonably sensitive about her reaction at the bachelorette party. She said most women would have reacted the same way if their fiancé surprised them with something so different from what they were expecting. But what really got to me was when she started talking about our future. Ruby laid out this whole vision of the life she expected us to have, the neighborhood we should live in, the kind of car I should be driving, the social circles we should be part of. Everything she described required significantly more money than I make, And when I pointed that out, she said I needed to be more ambitious about advancing my career. Ruby suggested I should look into switching companies or going back for an MBA to increase my earning potential. She said she wasn't asking me to change who I am, just to recognize that successful couples invest in their future together. According to her, my current job and lifestyle were fine for a single person but not appropriate for someone building a family. I asked her what she loved about me as I am right now, not as who I could become with the right improvements. Ruby struggled with that question. She talked about how I'm reliable and responsible, how I'm good with planning and logistics, but when I pushed her to name things she loved about my personality or our connection, she kept coming back to practical considerations. The turning point came when I asked her if she would still want to marry me if my financial situation never changed. Ruby said that wasn't a fair question because people are supposed to grow and improve throughout their lives. She said asking her to imagine a future where I stayed exactly the same wasn't realistic or healthy for our relationship. By the end of the conversation, I realized we had completely different definitions of love and partnership. Ruby sees our relationship as a project where I'm supposed to transform into someone who meets her standards. I thought we were two people who loved each other as we are and wanted to build something together. I told Ruby I needed some time to think about everything we'd discussed. She got frustrated and said I was making this more complicated than it needed to be. According to her, all couples have to work through expectations and compromises, and I was treating normal relationship discussions like some kind of crisis. But here's what really sealed it for me. As Ruby was leaving, she said we should just book a proper honeymoon destination and put this whole thing behind us. She had already picked out 3 resorts in Greece that she thought would photograph well and make everyone happy. She said once we got past this bump, we could focus on having the kind of wedding and marriage that would make us both proud. I realized she still didn't understand that this wasn't about vacation destinations or wedding budgets. This was about fundamental respect and compatibility. Ruby genuinely believes that her expectations are reasonable and that I'm the one being difficult by not embracing her vision for our future. Since that conversation, I've been doing a lot of thinking about what I actually want in a partner and a marriage. I love Ruby, but I'm starting to understand that love alone isn't enough if you have completely different values and expectations. I haven't made any final decisions yet, but I'm definitely not moving forward with wedding planning until we resolve these deeper issues. Ruby thinks I'm overthinking everything, but I think I'm finally thinking clearly for the first time in months. The wild part is that I'm not even angry anymore. I'm just sad that we got this far without really understanding each other. Ruby isn't a bad person, but she might not be the right person for more updates coming because this situation is definitely not resolved yet. Update 2. Alright guys, this is getting messier by the day and I need to vent because the situation has spiraled way beyond just Ruby and me. Thanks to everyone who commented on my last post, especially the people who pointed out that Ruby's behavior isn't going to change just because I talked to her about it. You were absolutely right. So after that 3-hour conversation I wrote about, I thought maybe we could work through our differences. I was wrong. Dead wrong. Ruby spent the weekend acting like our talk had resolved everything, and we were back on track for the wedding. She started sending me links to honeymoon resorts again and talking about finalizing catering details like nothing had happened. But here's where it gets interesting. Ruby's mom Phyllis called me Monday morning. Not Ruby. Her mom. Apparently, Ruby had told her family that I was having cold feet and being difficult about wedding planning. According to Phyllis, Ruby was stressed and confused about why I was making such a big deal out of a simple honeymoon misunderstanding. Phyllis wanted to have lunch with me to talk things through as family. She said she's always liked me and thought we were good together, but she was concerned about how I was handling pre-wedding stress. The way she framed it made it sound like I was the one causing problems by being oversensitive about Ruby's feedback. I agreed to meet with her because I figured Ruby's family deserved to understand what was really happening. We met at this cafe downtown and Phyllis immediately started talking about how wedding planning brings out the worst in everyone. She said Ruby had been under a lot of pressure trying to coordinate everything and maybe she hadn't communicated her honeymoon preferences clearly enough. But then Phyllis said something that really caught my attention. She mentioned that Ruby had always been particular about maintaining certain standards, especially when it comes to how things look to other people. She said this wasn't anything new. Ruby had been like this since she was a teenager, always worried about what her friends and their families would think about their choices. I asked Phyllis to explain what she meant by standards. She started talking about Ruby's expectations for their family vacations, the restaurants she was willing to eat at, the brands she insisted on wearing. According to Phyllis, Ruby has always believed that cutting corners or settling for less sends the wrong message about who you are and what you value. Then Phyllis told me something that really put things in perspective. She said Ruby's dad had struggled financially when Ruby was younger, and the family had to make a lot of compromises that Ruby found embarrassing. Apparently, Ruby had promised herself that when she got older, she would never have to settle for anything that made her feel ashamed or looked down on by others. Phyllis said she understood Ruby's drive to avoid anything that seemed like settling, but she was worried that Ruby might be applying those same standards too rigidly to our relationship. She asked me directly if I thought Ruby was being unreasonable about money and lifestyle expectations. I decided to be completely honest with Phyllis about our conversations. I told her about Ruby's comments regarding my career advancement, her suggestions about asking my parents for more wedding money, and her reaction to the Bali treehouse. I explained that I wasn't upset about Ruby having preferences, but about how she had handled expressing those preferences publicly. Phyllis listened to everything and then got quiet for a while. Finally, she said that Ruby might be repeating some patterns from her childhood that weren't healthy for adult relationships. She said Ruby's fear of being judged or looking inadequate had led to some problems in her previous relationships too. That's when Phyllis told me that Ruby's last serious boyfriend had broken up with her for similar reasons. According to her mom, Ruby had constantly pushed him to make more money, dress better, and socialize with different people. The relationship ended when he told Ruby that she was trying to turn him into someone else instead of loving who he actually was. I asked Phyllis why Ruby hadn't learned from that experience. She said Ruby had convinced herself that her ex-boyfriend just wasn't ambitious enough, and that any man who really loved her would want to improve himself to make her happy. Ruby apparently believed that asking your partner to grow and change was a sign of caring about the relationship. After talking with Phyllis for almost 2 hours, I realized that Ruby's behavior wasn't just about wedding stress or poor communication. This was a fundamental pattern in how she approaches relationships. She genuinely believes that love means pushing your partner to become better, even if they're happy with who they already are. Phyllis asked me what I was planning to do about the wedding. I told her honestly that I wasn't sure Ruby and I were compatible if she needed me to be someone different from who I am. Phyllis said she understood, but asked if I would be willing to talk to Ruby one more time before making any final decisions. That conversation happened Wednesday night, and it was even more revealing than our first talk. Ruby came over expecting to discuss honeymoon alternatives, but I told her I needed to understand something first. I asked her directly if she would be happy marrying me as I am right now, without any changes to my career, income, or lifestyle. Ruby's response was that she loves me, but relationships require both people to grow together. She said asking her to imagine a static future where nothing improves wasn't fair because that's not how successful marriages work. According to Ruby, couples should inspire each other to become better versions of themselves. I asked her what specifically she thought needed to improve about me. Ruby made a list. She wants me to pursue higher-paying opportunities, dress more professionally, even outside of work, be more social with her friends and their partners, and generally present myself as someone who takes success seriously. She said these weren't major changes, just adjustments that would benefit both of us. But when I asked Ruby what she was planning to change about herself for our marriage, she got defensive. She said she was already doing her part by planning a beautiful wedding and supporting my career. According to her, the changes she was suggesting for me were about reaching my potential, not about changing my core personality. That's when I realized we were having completely different conversations. Ruby sees our relationship as me rising to meet her standards, while I thought we were two people who loved each other as we are. She's not trying to be cruel or controlling. She genuinely believes that pushing me to change is an expression of love and commitment. The conversation ended with Ruby getting frustrated that I was overthinking everything. She said most women would have similar expectations and that I was being unrealistic about what marriage involves. According to her, successful couples make compromises and adjustments to build the life they want together. But here's what really sealed it for me. Ruby said that if I wasn't willing to work on improving myself for our relationship, then maybe I wasn't as committed to our future as she thought. She made it clear that marrying me as I am wasn't what she had in mind when she said yes to my proposal. I spent the rest of the week thinking about everything Phyllis had told me about Ruby's pattern with relationships. Ruby isn't going to change her approach because she doesn't see it as a problem. She sees it as having standards and refusing to settle. I finally understand that this isn't about the Bali treehouse or wedding budgets or honeymoon destinations. This is about whether I want to spend my life feeling like I'm not good enough as I am. Ruby loves the person she thinks I can become, but I need someone who loves the person I already am. The wedding is supposed to be in 6 weeks, and I still haven't made a final decision, but I'm leaning toward calling it off. Not out of anger or spite, but because I finally understand that we want different things from marriage and partnership. Ruby texted me yesterday asking if we could meet this weekend to finalize the last few wedding details. I think that conversation is going to be the one where everything gets decided once and for all. One more update coming because this weekend is going to determine everything. Final update. This is going to be my final update because the situation has reached its conclusion. And honestly, I need to close this chapter and move on. Thank you to everyone who followed this story and gave advice. You helped me see things clearly when I was too close to the situation. So that weekend conversation I mentioned in my last post happened, and it was the deciding factor in everything. Ruby came over Saturday morning with wedding binders and her laptop, ready to finalize details. She had printed out a timeline for the last month before the wedding and wanted to go through vendor confirmations together. I told Ruby we needed to talk before we could discuss any wedding planning. She got that look she always gets when she thinks I'm about to be difficult, but she sat down and asked what was on my mind. I told her I had been thinking about our conversations over the past few weeks and I needed to understand something fundamental about our relationship. I asked Ruby if she could honestly say she would be happy and fulfilled being married to me exactly as I am, with my current job, income, and lifestyle for the next 10 years. No hypothetical improvements, no career advancement, no changes to who I am or how I live, just me, as I exist right now. Ruby's immediate response was that the question wasn't fair because it assumed that growth and improvement are bad things. She said all successful couples work together to build better lives and that expecting everything to stay the same wasn't realistic. According to her, asking someone to commit to never growing or changing was actually selfish. But I pressed her for a direct answer. If circumstances forced us to live exactly as we do now for the foreseeable future, would she be content with that life and that version of me? Ruby got frustrated and said I was trying to trap her into saying something that would make her look shallow or materialistic. Finally, she told me that she loves me, but she also loves the potential she sees in us as a couple. She said part of what attracted her to me was that I seemed like someone who shared her ambitions and would work toward building the kind of life she wants. Ruby said settling for less than what we could achieve together would be giving up on our relationship. That's when I realized we were talking about two completely different concepts of love. Ruby loves what she thinks we could become together. I love who she actually is right now. She's waiting for me to transform into someone who meets her vision. I was hoping she would accept me as I already am. I told Ruby that I understood her perspective but that we had fundamentally different expectations for marriage. I explained that I need a partner who loves me as I am, not someone who sees me as a project to improve. Ruby said that was an immature way to think about serious adult relationships. The conversation went in circles for over an hour. Ruby kept trying to convince me that her expectations were normal and healthy, while I kept trying to explain that I felt like I wasn't good enough for her as I actually exist. She said I was being dramatic and overthinking normal relationship dynamics. Finally, Ruby said something that really crystallized everything for me. She told me that if I wasn't willing to work on becoming the best version of myself for our marriage, then maybe I wasn't ready to be married at all. She said marriage is about two people pushing each other to grow and improve, and that my resistance to her feedback showed I wasn't mature enough for that kind of partnership. That's when I made my decision. I told Ruby that I was calling off the wedding. Not because I don't love her, but because we want different things from marriage and partnership. I said she deserves someone who shares her ambitions and lifestyle goals, and I deserve someone who loves me as I am. Ruby's reaction was immediate anger. She said I was throwing away a good relationship over nothing and that I was going to regret giving up on us. She accused me of using the honeymoon incident as an excuse to avoid commitment and said I was clearly not ready for marriage if I was going to run away over normal relationship discussions. Then Ruby started crying and asking me to reconsider. She said she wasn't asking me to change everything about myself, just to be open to growth and improvement. According to her, every couple goes through this kind of adjustment period and works through it together. She said if I loved her, I would be willing to compromise and find a middle ground. But that's when I realized there wasn't a middle ground. Ruby fundamentally believes that love means pushing your partner to become better, while I believe love means accepting your partner as they are. Neither of us is wrong, but we're not compatible. I spent the rest of the weekend dealing with wedding cancellations. Most vendors were understanding, though we lost deposits on several things. Ruby's family was shocked and kept calling to ask if we could work things out. My parents were supportive, but sad that things had ended this way. The hardest part was telling people about the cancellation. Ruby had already started spreading her version of events, which was that I had gotten cold feet and decided I wasn't ready for marriage. She told her friends and family that I had used the honeymoon disagreement as an excuse to back out of our commitment. I didn't try to correct her story because, honestly, it didn't matter what people thought happened. The important thing was that we both understood this was the right decision, even if we understood it for different reasons. Ruby texted me a few times over the following week, mostly about logistics like returning gifts and dividing shared purchases. But she also sent a couple of longer messages saying she thought I was making a mistake and that I would realize eventually that she was trying to help me become successful. The last message she sent really stuck with me. Ruby said that she had tried to love me enough to help me reach my potential, but that she couldn't force me to want better things for myself. She said she hoped I would find whatever it was I was actually looking for in a relationship. I realized that Ruby genuinely believes she was being loving and supportive by pushing me to change. She's not a villain or a bad person. She just has a completely different definition of love and partnership than I do. She thinks love means working to improve each other, while I think love means accepting each other as you are. It's been 2 weeks since I called off the wedding, and I'm honestly relieved. I miss Ruby sometimes, but I don't miss feeling like I wasn't good enough as I am. I don't miss the constant pressure to become someone different or the sense that my current life wasn't adequate for her standards. I found out through mutual friends that Ruby is already dating someone new, a guy who works in finance and apparently shares her lifestyle aspirations. I'm genuinely happy for her because she found someone who wants the same things she wants from a relationship. As for me, I'm taking some time to figure out what I actually want in a partner and a marriage. This whole experience taught me a lot about my own values and what I'm willing to compromise on versus what I'm not. The Bali Treehouse booking that started this whole thing, I ended up rebooking it for myself and taking a solo trip there last month. It was exactly as amazing as I thought it would be, peaceful, beautiful, and completely perfect for someone who appreciates that kind of experience. Ruby would have hated it, but I loved every minute. Sometimes the universe gives you exactly the information you need, even when it comes in a form you don't expect. Ruby's reaction to that honeymoon surprise showed me everything I needed to know about our compatibility. I'm grateful it happened before the wedding instead of after. Thanks again to everyone who followed this story and offered advice. Your perspectives really helped me see the situation clearly and make the right decision for both of us.